Hello, everybody, and welcome to International Podcast Day 2019. I am Dave Lee, co-founder of International Podcast Day, an international celebration of the power of podcast. And I am super excited this year to offer up Shannon Hernandez for a little talk with us. Shannon, how you doing today, man?
Doing great, Dave. How are you doing, man?
Dude, I can't complain, man. Another successful International Podcast Day. We have so many podcasters like yourself that are volunteering their time. People are taking to the social medias and sharing the hashtag. And there's so much love going on, and just the amazing comments we're hearing from listeners and podcasters themselves about the day in celebration. It gets better year in and year out, brother.
Yeah, I've seen it all over Instagram because I'm mainly on Instagram these days. I still play on Twitter not a lot, but or quite a bit, but I'm mainly on Instagram, and I see the posts. I'm following the posts on International Podcast Day, and they're coming through, and I'm like, that's really cool.
Yep. Yeah, it's some good stuff, man. Well, I know you're going to be sharing a lot of tips, how you can monetize your podcast through social media. You're big on Instagram. We follow each other there. It's always cool. So you're definitely a voice that I want a part of the International Podcast Day community, and people that I think need to listen to what you have to say, man. I know we met originally, I think, down in San Diego during one of the satellite podcast movement events. And that was 2014 or something. I met a couple times between here and there. So I'm just really excited to have you on. But before I get to you, I did want to thank all of our sponsors for International Podcast Day. Without them, and of course, without the volunteers and the podcasters from our 22 different countries, this event would not be what it is today without them. Blueberry, they are our platinum sponsor. They are a full-service podcasting company providing podcast hosting, statistics, and advertising opportunities. You can find more about them over at blueberry.com. Repurpose.io, they're our gold sponsor. They automatically convert your audio podcast into engaging videos and upload them to YouTube, Facebook, and other social media channels. You can actually use it for free over at repurpose.io/IPD. And of course, Libsyn, another gold sponsor. They are a podcast hosting, distribution, and monetization solution for you, the audio and video podcaster. Reach your audience everywhere and on the most popular audience destinations like Spotify and Pandora. Find more over at libsyn.com. Thank you very much to StreamYard, our streaming partner for International Podcast Day 2019, for making all things happen on the back end here. And of course, lastly, our celebration supporters, Second Line Themes, Geeks Rising Network, Synth, Outlier HQ, and Focusrite. So definitely encourage you, head over to internationalpodcastday.com/sponsors, grab some of those giveaways, grab some of the free things, and of course, get some discounted items for you as a podcaster. Well, Shannon, I am really excited to have you, and it's great that we've connected, found some time to get you on here. So take it away, brother.
All right. Well, thanks, Dave. I really appreciate you inviting me, and welcome to everyone who's a part of International Podcast Day. Such a cool day to have, where we can commune together about podcasting. And so today we're going to be talking a little bit about monetizing your podcast. And there's monetizing your podcast doesn't have to be something that is difficult. I don't believe it is something difficult. And I will tell you this right now, I'm not here to sell you on anything other than an idea. I'm not here to sell you to buy anything from me. All you have to do is just take what I'm sharing with you and implement it for yourself. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. And Dave, I'm going to share my screen. So when you're ready to put that up, we can go ahead and get that screen shared. So we're going to go ahead and start talking about monetizing your podcast, of course. And like I said, we need to get beyond this idea that monetization is kind of it's the thing that you shouldn't talk about. Even though there's people out there in the podcasting space that are monetizing a podcast, I don't think they're really worried about the idea of money or monetizing, or maybe they didn't worry about the process it took to go ahead and monetize a podcast. So today, I'm going to go through quite a bit, and certainly don't think that everything that I'm sharing with you is going to be compartmentalized in a box. It is something that I believe can be utilized and taken for your own, to make it into your own. I believe that when we share ideas and tips with each other, we can create them and build them into our own philosophy of how we operate our podcast, or how we monetize our podcast, or how we edit a podcast. So just understand that what I'm telling you is not the word of God. It is actually something that I want you to share and build into your own working philosophy. So let's go ahead and get started. And first of all, well, who am I? Well, my name is Shannon Hernandez. I go by the radio nickname The Shan Man. I work at a radio station here in Phoenix, Arizona called 98K UPD. And I've been doing this for 19 years. I'm coming up on 20 years here in the Valley of the Sun. And I'm clearly, obviously, a veteran. So I'm also a podcaster, a podcast producer, and I'm a YouTuber. I recently just got into the YouTube game. And YouTube is actually something that I've really been focusing on. And even though I'm not going to be talking about YouTube, but YouTube has been something that I've been focusing on a lot because there have been a lot of questions that come through on my email, that ask questions about, the editing process, or what should I do when I get a host, and how should I operate, my RSS feed, whatnot. And I decided to go ahead and create a YouTube channel that basically is just like the how-to, the DIY of, hey, here are the answers to those questions. Let me answer them for you. These are my philosophies. Take them with whichever grain of salt you want to take it with. All right. So I created this channel, or this YouTube channel, to help people out. And I've really been diving into that because I produce a number of podcasts for people. And of course, I have my radio gig on the site. So that to me is kind of like a podcast. But there are different modalities between podcasting and radio, but the two definitely can exist. So, excuse me. So what is it that exactly that I do? So what I do when it comes down to, say, a coach or someone who is helping build a podcast, I help people optimize the time spent editing their podcast. And this is where I think the most important thing, personally for myself, this is the most important part of your podcast that needs to take precedence over anything else, is that you have to optimize the time spent editing your podcast. I took a survey on my website over the course of the last year, where I asked people, how long does it take you to edit your podcast? And granted, these are all people who are either, they're either new podcasters, or they're somewhat seasoned podcasters. And they're still telling me that it takes them anywhere between 3 to 5 hours to edit up, say, a 40 to 50 minute podcast episode. And to me, in my mind, that's just like mind blowing. I don't think that is something that should take that amount of time. That's an hour a day. And I don't think you should be spending no more than 20 minutes editing a podcast at all. So I help people optimize their editing time on podcasts, but I also help open minds to open up opportunities, because whenever you optimize for editing, you're opening up opportunities for you to earn some form of money coming in the door. And I'll be talking about that here shortly. And I also help you inspire. I help you to take action and implement. I believe it was Taylor that we were talking about. I think that's how you say her name. I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name, but in the previous session, she was talking about how we can all run into these ruts where we can procrastinate. We see the latest episode of Stranger Things. I know for me, I'm excited about El Camino, the Breaking Bad show. So I get it. But eventually down the line, you're going to want to start taking some action and implement the strategies that I have here. So who is this presentation for? Who is this podcast for? Today, this podcast is for those who have at least 10 episodes and have built some form of a routine into editing and publishing a podcast. Also, it's for those who want to make an impact. Most of the podcasters that are out there, they want to make an impact with the topic that they're involved in. As we all know, we're all involved in some form of niche. If you're a podcaster, you say, oh, well, I don't know what my niche is, then you need to figure out the niche, because how Apple Podcasts is categorized is by categories, and they're all based on niches. So we want to make an impact within that niche, and that niche will help drive sales and traffic back to our podcast and the assets that we create. Okay, podcasters also, this presentation is also for podcasters who turn their strategy into a social media long game. You might hear a lot about this as you continue to research over and over about social media, and you might think, oh, this all happens overnight. It really doesn't happen overnight. This stuff takes a long, long time. Dave and I were just talking, and I think we just talked about it earlier. We've known each other since the very beginning of, I guess, when Podcast Movement, the big conference, happened. And that was like 7 years ago. I can't remember. We've known each other for that long. And in that time, I've implemented for myself these long game strategies. So don't think that it's something that happens in a month. It happens in 2 months, 3 months, a year. It's constantly and ever growing. Okay, you're always working towards it. And this presentation is for the motivated, inspired, and of course tenacious. If that's you, then this is definitely for you. So before we get started, I want to talk to you a little bit about monetization, and let's kind of clear the air about money, period. Because I know when we're talking about money, people get weird. I know that when we hear about podcasts, we hear about that these are passion projects, and I get it, because podcasting to me is it's a passion project. The podcast that I create for myself, the podcast that I have, where they were called Be the Experience or Swing Shift Side Hustle, and these were all podcasts where they were passionate about the personal development journey that I was going on, or maybe it was about the personal development journey of musicians and rock stars, and I was able to interview them and ask questions that are outside of the realm. These are all passion projects. I get it, but our efforts that we're creating when it comes down to podcasting, it's a ton, right? When we see the struggle about editing, we see the struggle about monetization, we get that, all right? But we have to remember that our efforts should be rewarded in some way, and that's through monetization, all right? Now, we need to talk about monetization in the fact that monetization is more than just sponsorships. Sponsorships just don't drive your podcast completely unless you're getting thousands and thousands and thousands of downloads per episode, okay? Maybe you're getting thousands and thousands of downloads per day. It just all depends. So when we think about this, all right, and we think about monetization, it's more than sponsorships. It's more about streamlining your podcast editing process. I will talk about this coming up here in a few minutes. I'm not going to show you how to do it, but I'm going to tell you that you should be streamlining so that you're spending less time editing and more time building the content, finding the guests, and building the assets that will help drive monetization back towards you, okay? So monetization is all about building brand new opportunities. Now, I heard just the other day that monetization is difficult, and I've heard that it's difficult. I've heard that it is easy. I tend to lean on the side of that. Monetization is easy if you consider the fact that you are preparing yourself for success. Where I see a lot of struggle with podcasters is that they are not prepared, or they're not preparing themselves for success. They put it out there and then they don't follow up with it. And so we want to make sure that we are preparing the assets that we create to monetize so that we can build trust. That is like the one big thing I think podcasters really should be focusing on, is that we are focusing on building trust. Whatever we are creating, whatever content that we build, we want to build some form of trust. So let's look at that. Let's look at how when we build content, let's look at how that looks like and illustrate it, what building content is all about. I've been doing this for 20 years and I know what it's like to build content and build trust over time. And you have to build this every single time you build a piece of content, you publish a brand new podcast, whatever it is that you're doing. You want to make sure that people can come back to you and say like, oh yeah, Shannon's the guy that I can trust because I believe in his recommendations. So let's illustrate what that looks like when it comes down to building our content, okay? So first we start with a piece of quality content. That quality content can be in the form of a how-to, or maybe it's giving someone else's account of the journey that they had gone on. And with that quality content comes value. Now, value and quality content both work interchangeably. They go back and forth, and they all funnel back to this idea of trust. So we all believe that when we build quality content, we build value, we earn trust. But then when our listeners start trusting us, that all flows back because they know that if they can trust us to build quality content and value. That is the hugest thing, right, that I think that podcasters need to focus on, is that you're building quality content, you're building value so that they can continue to come back. This works not only in podcasting, this works in radio, it works on YouTube, it works on a blog, it works everywhere, okay? This is a very universal concept. Build trust. Now, podcast value comes in the form of entertainment. How do we build value? It comes in the form of entertainment. You have heard entertainment entertainment can be motivational or inspirational sayings, inside jokes that you're saying on your podcast. Maybe you're making someone's day with your thoughts and your beliefs and your desires. Maybe those are the things that are valuable to the listener. That could be one of those things. The other form of value comes in the form of education. It's maybe a how-to instruction, like I mentioned before. Maybe you're giving a how-to in your podcast. Maybe you're sharing an interview that shares that journey, just like I mentioned before. Maybe you're sharing actual processes and workflows in order for you as a human being, or maybe as the listener, as to learn something that take away from you to see their success. Maybe you're doing that. Maybe it's shared inspiration. Maybe it's motivational. Maybe it's inspirational sayings. Believe it or not, the content that you're already creating as a podcaster, you already have content that you could probably monetize off in the future or right now. You just haven't realized it quite yet. So we're going to jump into that here real shortly. So what I'm going to encourage you to do, I'm always encouraging you to build something. You're going to be building constantly with your podcast. As I mentioned before, I've known Dave for quite a few years. And in that time, I have built a framework for myself. I've educated myself on learning how to make these processes work. Just like when you build a building, there is a framework. And within that framework, you're going to be building slower, little by little. Okay. And once you build little by little, you're going to implement the walls. Maybe you're going to implement the plumbing. You're going to implement all those at one time or another. So what I'm asking you to do as a podcaster, when it comes to the production of your podcast and the monetization of your podcast, is that you're always building. Always keep building. Make sure that you're learning something that will make you that much better so that you can share your thoughts, your beliefs, your philosophies with your audience, because that is where the reward comes from. All right. But first, I think we need to talk about the areas in which podcasters can always improve. And this is not just not for you, and it's not exclusive for me either. It's for everyone. All right. It's for everyone on the internet. Areas where podcasters should improve. Now, the first step that I think you need to be focusing on is the communication with you and your audience. You have a podcast maybe where you're sharing this value that is all about, maybe it's about, fostering kittens, and you're building a community that goes around it. The one thing about podcasting is that when you develop and you publish a podcast, you have to direct them in the podcast to go somewhere to communicate with you. And typically in the past, that has been with Twitter, and people can communicate with you there. But now recently it's with Facebook groups, and you can get people into a Facebook group. But what I recommend that you do is that you're always communicating with your audience by responding to your audience if they ask questions, if they're asking questions over email, social media, voicemail. Maybe they're send shout outs to them. This is something that I think is huge for a podcaster. You should be recognizing your audience, because when you do that, you show and share value to them. They are mind blown by the fact that they get to hear from you, and they're like, wow, he actually reached out to me. There was this gal that I had communicated with when I had my podcast, The Swing Shift Side Hustle, and I was publishing on the regular basis. And I interviewed the band Greta Van Fleet. And when I interviewed that band, I also created a segment inside of my podcast where I asked people to leave a voicemail, and I directed them to a website on my website using the SpeakPipe plugin for WordPress. And I directed them there, and this gal left a voicemail. Well, the next episode that I created, I featured her voicemail on my podcast, right? So we're building more value over time. And she was mind blown by the fact that I asked this question about, I think, what would be the band that you would love to see that isn't around anymore. And she answered it in detail as much as she could. It was a good minute and 30 seconds of value, and it inspired other people to leave voicemails. So when you're communicating with your audience, you're creating value and you're building trust, right? Then what we're talking about is that we want to also encourage this continued engagement, all right? This will all lead back to the monetization. All right. We want to respond to comments outside of the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and we want to continually engage and engage. This means following up as much as you can, asking them questions. And sometimes when you're following up with them, sometimes maybe you run out of questions. But what you're trying to do is build this community so that you can have this trust. All right. Now, when you build a focused audience, and we talk about building a focused niche, your niche is going to help you sell to your audience. This is something that I have experienced personally. I've experienced it with the radio station, and I've seen other brands do it over time. Your niche will also help you gain sponsors. But I want to make this clear about sponsorships. When we start talking about sponsorships, I want you to know that sponsorships are a very, I would say it's there's many different opinions about sponsorships, but I'm going to share with you the one that I keep seeing floating around on the internet. And it's very similar to what we see in radio. Okay. So we're going to talk about the pathways of podcasting profits right here in this particular section. All right. And this is going to be a roadmap for you to start earning extra income, but don't think this is the only way, because this may not be the best way, but it could be a way in order for you to earn profits. So what we're going to show you are 3 different in-programming opportunities that exist right now in podcasting. There could be others, and don't think that this all exists in a vacuum. There could be others, but these are the ones that I continue to see. We have the sponsorships, we have endorsements, and then of course there's something called a billboard, and I'll explain what a billboard is. You guys may not understand what a billboard is, but I understand what it is from a radio standpoint. Okay. So first, let's talk about sponsorships. Now, sponsorships, you know them as pre-roll or mid-roll. They show up before the podcast starts, or maybe they show up in the middle of the podcast itself. And their length can be anywhere between 5 seconds to a minute long. They're pre-recorded, they're made, ahead of time, and they're always showing up at the beginning or the middle of the podcast. We all know this one. We're very familiar with it. And you can charge a certain amount for these particular sponsorships. Then you have endorsements, okay? Endorsements are basically it's basically a way to say, hey, I use this particular product. Let's say I drink a particular juice. I can go out to this juice store and say, I drink your juice every day. I want to talk about it on my podcast as an endorsement. Can I do that? You can go out and reach out to that particular juice store and say, hey, yeah, this is something that I endorse. And they may endorse you over the course of a month. They may endorse you over the course of 2 months. Maybe it's 3 years. I don't know, whatever it could be. But usually these are about a 1 minute read. You hear these on the radio all the time. They're typically in the mid program. They're not in a pre-roll or a mid-roll. They're actually in the middle of the program themselves. So you can work with a company whose products and services you use for your podcast, your website, etc. Anything that takes to promote and endorse those particular products. Okay. Now you have billboards. Now billboards are very unique and they're interesting because you have an overall sponsor for a podcast, right? Maybe your sponsor for your podcast is, and we'll just use the one that I can remember off the top of my head. Let's just say MailChimp. Whenever you listen to the very first season of Serial, you heard MailChimp constantly being out there, Blue Apron, all right? And they sponsor the entire podcast itself. But then you have this idea of billboards, and billboards are small scale sponsorships. Now, instead of a sponsor for the whole podcast, they are sponsors for particular segments of your podcast, not the whole podcast, but the segment itself. They sponsor the segment. This is where I encourage podcasters to start organizing their podcast in a way in which you can start opening up brand new opportunities. Now, let's ask the question, how much can I charge for these particular sponsorships, billboards, endorsements? This is all going to depend on podcasting metrics. Now, metrics, they're the most important thing that most traditional advertisers are going to be looking at. So monetization is only beneficial if you're getting thousands of downloads per episode. And I think the majority of us can agree on that. Whenever we think about people making, six-figure incomes off their podcast alone, it's probably because they're getting thousands and thousands of downloads to their podcast. So when I talk about opening up these opportunities for sponsorships, and this might have been a little bit backwards, but let's talk about this programming clock worksheet. And I talked about this whenever I did a satellite talk with Podcast Movement. Dave was at that one, and where I talked about building in a programming clock for yourself. And as you can see, this is an hour-long clock. So we have the top of the hour marked at 0 up here. Oops, I'll just go and leave the mouse off there. You have 0, and then it goes all the way around to about 40 minutes. And the things that are in green, the areas that are in green are the areas of opportunity. Okay, so you have the pre-roll, and then you have the optional ads that are on that right-hand side. And you can build in opportunities. Basically, what you're doing is you're building in an inventory. You can allow a certain amount of time into your podcast based on building in this inventory. So let's say where it says optional ads, let's say you're only allowing 5 minutes of ads in your particular podcast. You can definitely do that if you want. Now, I know there's a big thing where podcasters say like, well, I don't like putting too many ads in my podcast and it's going to devalue the podcast. It all depends on how much inventory you want to put into your podcast. You'll hear guys like Joe Rogan, or you'll hear Joe Rogan do podcast ads all the time, and maybe the ads last too long. I get it, but they are likely, the sponsors are the ones that are sponsoring. So when we talk about this, and they're building out this model here of this programming clock worksheet, what they're thinking about is they are thinking about costs per download. All right, CPM, cost per 1,000 download. All right, and this is all based on like a Google methodology. All right, how many views can you get to a Google page, or whatever it may be. All right, so CPM stands for cost per 1,000 downloads. So this is the model that podcasters are using. This is the one that I see thrown around. It's the CPM download times the price per episode. All right, which will equal out the income. So then when we look at the CPM model as an example, let's just say that's the CPM multiplied by $20, which is going to equal your income. So if you had 3,000 downloads, you're not taking all 1,000, you're just taking the three thousand downloads times 20 is going to equal $60 per episode. If you multiply that times 3 times in a month, if you're doing a podcast a week, then you're talking about $180 a month that you're getting paid on your CPM. That's if you're getting those 3,000 downloads per week. And let's take it to another level. Let's say you get 12,000 downloads per week. You're doing $20 per episode. And then of course you got 2 sponsors. Then it's 12 times 20 times 2 sponsors, which means you're getting $480 per episode. You've clearly increased the CPM. So the problem we have here, though, is that not everyone has thousands of downloads to get. Now, some do, but not everyone does. And if you do have those thousands of downloads, then I suggest, or I would ask, why aren't we going out and looking for a sponsor on this one? Earning a little bit of extra money on this. So I think that when we look at this model right here, we look at the programming clock itself, when you're building in an inventory, you can create this, but it may not work for sponsors. However, these elements that I'm creating in this model right here is important. It's very important for your podcast because we are planting the seeds for listener behavior. One thing that I have learned over my course in radio, all 20 years, is that it doesn't matter if it's podcasting, it doesn't matter if it's YouTube, it doesn't matter if it's a blog. It's all about your behavior. It's all about the behavior. So what I'm asking you to do is to develop a listening behavior to where people expect some type of ad that is going to be in that position. Okay. So this is what we're going to do. We are going to start building out systems to promote assets that we are going to build on the back end of our podcast. Now, before I go into this and I start talking about all of this, we have to figure out what our own inventory is for our assets. All right. Now, if you don't think this actually works, and if you think this takes a lot of time, I'm going to tell you right now, yes, it does take time. But remember, we're talking about a long game. So you can work on this stuff a little bit every single day to build in your inventory. All right. Now, if you think this doesn't work, it does work. The prime example of this is with Michael Stelzner. Michael Stelzner's podcast, the Social Media Marketing Podcast. And this podcast has been around forever. And I remember the first time I heard Michael starting to promote for other things that he owned within his podcast, because he wasn't asking for sponsors that were outside of his niche. He wasn't asking for MailChimp. He wasn't asking for Blue Apron. He was promoting the things that he was creating so that he could drive traffic and earn an income to it. So we started seeing him implement social media marketing world into his podcast itself. Then we start seeing other programs, the Facebook Ads Summit, Video Marketing Summit, and then the Social Media Marketing Society. These are all things that happen seasonally. So he has social media marketing in the spring. And then I think maybe before that, he has a Social Media Marketing Society. And then in the middle of the year, he has these little ad summits. So he's promoting them inside of his podcast so he can drive awareness to it. So I hope that makes sense, because this is where I think podcasters should be putting their eggs in their basket. People are thinking that they have to go out and get a sponsor. They think that they have to have thousands of dollars coming in the door. It's not necessarily true. I can tell you with Michael, and I don't know Michael. I mean, I've met Michael a couple of times at Podcast Movement, but I will tell you this, Michael has thousands upon thousands of people going to social media marketing world, and he's doing it through the promotion of not only his podcast, but his website as well. The big question that I heard yesterday on, I think it was right here on International Podcast Day was, should I have a website? And I think, yes, you should have a website. Now, don't be overwhelmed by all this. You're going to take time to build all this stuff out, because I will tell you this, it's taken me tons of time to build it out, but I've just taken one step forward every single day and seen a success and made a little win for myself every day. All right. So this is where you should be writing a couple of things down. All right. We're going to be talking about the assets that you build. All right. So if asset number one is going to be all based around social media. Okay, we're going to be basing it around social media and the assets that you're going to drive to get people into a certain area that will help sell your assets. All right. So the first asset that you want to create is going to be the top level asset. And we're talking about membership sites. We're talking about maybe a free Facebook group, or we're talking about Patreon itself. Okay. I personally don't have a Patreon. I have something inside of Facebook that excuse me, that is like a Patreon. But what I have done is I have treated it like a Patreon itself. And I'm all about testing something out that is brand new. Okay. So the two areas that we're going to be talking about are Facebook groups and Patreon. And the reason why we're doing this is because we are going to be building a community of people who know, like, and trust us over time. These are going to be the people that are going to be pushing our assets out and disseminating it, because there's no better way to have better promotion than the people who know, like, and trust you. All right. So the first thing we want to start with is a free Facebook group. All right. And these are very basic steps. I understand, but these have to be reiterated, I think, so that we can remind ourselves why we're doing it. All right. So step one, you want to create a Facebook group for your podcast. If you don't have a Facebook page on Facebook, I get it. You should have a Facebook page. A lot of podcasters tend to not like Facebook. A lot of podcasters tend to hate other platforms that don't work for them. But I will tell you this right now. You should not hate the one thing that you got to work with. So don't hate the thing that you got to work with, because you got to work with it anyway. Work with the thing that is working with other people. Figure it out. If it doesn't work for you, go to the platform where you know your audience is going to be hanging out. But I will tell you this right now. There was a large investment inside of Facebook groups that Facebook is putting on right now that you guys can leverage from completely on your own, okay? So create a Facebook group for your podcast, then connect it to your podcast Facebook page itself so that it is a feature on your page. Then on your podcast, start inviting listeners to join your free Facebook group from your podcast on your social media. So drive them from your Twitter to your free Facebook group. Drive them from, say, an email list to your free Facebook group. Drive them from whatever area that they are communicating and put them on there. Put them in a Facebook group. And then what you're going to do, we come back to this old friend of ours, value. You want to add value every single time. The value can be in the form of you sharing tips, tricks, maybe it's entertainment. But what you will see is when you continue to add value, then the group starts to add more value. And you can also almost take a step back away from these groups. This is what I have experienced. Step 5 is that you're going to now use that Facebook group to occasionally push people into your Patreon group. So you're moving them from Facebook into Patreon, because the value that you're creating in the Facebook group isn't as valuable as what you'll now create in Patreon. So as an example, I'll show you what my page looks like on Facebook. And these are just screenshots, okay? This is my fan page on Facebook. It's the Shannon fan page, part of 98K UPD, but this is my own fan page. And people know they can find me here. We have about 12,000 people that are on this particular page, and they know where they can find me. They know they can find the comments. I asked them to subscribe and get the notifications. But one thing that I noticed a few months back is that I started seeing that I had access to groups, and you can now connect groups to your page, right? Then Facebook came back at me and they said, hey, we want to give you access to this particular program like Patreon. It's called supporters, and people can pay you in order to continue to build out content that is valuable. So your value as a content creator is rewarded in a sense. And I thought, let's go ahead and do that. Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that. So I started building out these groups, and I built out a group where it's a very small, tight knit of people, a very small niche of people where we are all in there communicating, and they're adding value on their own, okay? They contribute to be a part of this particular group. They contribute to me because they know, and I let them know that I'm a content creator, and it takes me time to build this stuff. I mean, all of us take a ton of time to build content. So when you are transparent enough to tell them, hey, look, it takes me a lot of time to build this content, you know, your contributions are very, very well recognized, and they help me out a lot. They will join and they will start building community. Now, let's say you don't have to start as a paid group. What I'm talking about here is that this is now a paid group. This is like Patreon. So I built my value on the Facebook page itself, not in a group. It was on the Facebook page itself, and I started doing live feeds to funnel them into this particular group. So that's what I'm asking you to do. And then they get into the group, and then we start seeing that there are people interacting in here. So what do you offer inside of a membership group that will help add the value to your podcast itself? So it's just more value. Okay, you're adding more value, but maybe you're giving it in terms of more time. Let's say in the Facebook group, you do live feeds. And this is something that I do on my particular Facebook page. I'll do a live feed every Tuesday and Thursday. And I'll do 20 minutes of that live feed on Tuesday and Thursday, and we'll talk about whatever, but it's more generalized. And then what I end up doing is I say, I promote them. I promote my group, and I say, hey, if you want to become a supporter and you want to support what's going on and have more access to me and get a little bit more from me, I'm going to be doing a private Facebook Live for supporters in a few minutes on over in the supporters area. There's a button. And of course, in Facebook, there is a button. They say there's a button down below that's got a badge with a heart in the middle of it. You tap that, learn more about what it takes to become a supporter and support what I'm doing and contributing to my efforts. Since I started doing that, I started adding more value in those live feeds that are for private supporters, and I spend an additional 30 minutes with them, and we talk about whatever it may be. Sometimes that's all it takes. So what can you offer inside your Patreon site? Behind the scenes photos and videos. I did this just a few months back. I was backstage for a concert. I don't know if you're familiar with the band Breaking Benjamin, but I was backstage and Slipknot, and I was taking pictures and I was posting them in the supporters area and letting them know that I was in the supporters area. So you can do that. Those are photos that don't get shared publicly. Maybe they get shared publicly later on down the line for a Throwback Thursday or whatever, but these are things that you can do. Maybe you're giving early access to upcoming podcast episodes. You've heard this one before, but maybe you should start thinking about refining that editing process and making it a much a speedier process so you can pump out more podcasts, especially early access to those podcast episodes, maybe bonus episodes or outtakes that happen before the podcast recording. The speaker beforehand talks about like these conversations that happen beforehand, which are really, really cool. I didn't know that this was a thing until my friend Dominic had told me that outtakes are always a cool thing he likes to hear behind the scenes. And, I can't remember who he said. It could have been the Tiger Belly podcast. I don't remember who it was, but he said that's what ends up happening. So I thought that was kind of a cool thing. So I'm including that in here, what you offer as value. Maybe it's bonus live video feeds inside your Patreon. You can do this inside of Patreon if you're using YouTube Live. It's a huge, huge thing. And then maybe what we add is bonus swag or goodies. You can do this. This is something that I have done, and I think it's something that you can do as well. All right. So let's first jump into how much should you charge for your Patreon and people who are going to support you. Okay. This is all going to vary. And I've seen Patreon prices go anywhere between 99 cents to, as a starting tier, all the way to $10 as a starting tier. It just all depends. Or maybe it's just, you pay whatever you want. But let's just look at that breakdown. And this is something that I've broken down for Radio Inc. magazine. I've broken it down for quite a few people, a couple publications, and saying like, this is what the breakdown looks like. If you want to make a certain amount of money, let's start adding value and put a price on top of it. Because when we look at these price breakdowns, who's doing this better than anyone else? Netflix is doing this better than anyone else. They have millions of people doing this, right? And millions of people subscribing to their service because they add value every single time. So for you, it would be $10 a month. Let's just say it's $10 a month and you get 20 members. You've got $200, give or take. You have to remember that Patreon takes the money out for their cut. But let's just say on a flat rate, you're getting $200 for that first month. Then let's say the next month you get 10 additional members, you're getting $300, right? So you have $300. Now you start growing these members to come into your Patreon, all funneled from your Facebook page, all right, your Facebook group. All right, so you're getting roughly $300. Then we look at month 3, and you can see that you're starting to grow. Now, if you ask me, would $300 be enough to pay for your hosting and maybe your digital audio workstation and your website? Yes. Every month, if they are contributing to what you are creating because they find your value most important. So $10 times 30, and then add an additional 5, you're talking $350. So here's what I'm going to recommend to you. And I think a lot of podcasters have said this as well. Start small. Don't overwhelm yourself. Start small and remain loyal to everyone who is coming into your funnel through your Facebook group. This is going to be one of the single most important things that you have to remember. Start small and remain loyal. And when I say remain loyal, I say remain loyal to the few that are there. If you have only 4 people that are there, continue to add value, because when you start funneling people in and they start seeing that there is value inside of these Patreon areas, then they're going to say like, oh yeah, there's a lot of value here. I see that. And they can go on social media and promote you to come back, or to promote their friends to come back and become a member. So we have to remember that. All right. So that's asset number 1. All right. I know we're only on asset number 1. So let's talk about asset number 2, and that's merchandising with dropshipping. Hang on real quick. As I get older, my voice tends to go out a lot faster, especially when you work on radio. So let's talk about our asset number 2, merchandising with dropshipping. So what is dropshipping? So drop shipping is a retail fulfillment method where a store doesn't keep the products it sells in stock. Instead, when a store sells a product, it purchases an item and from a third party, and then it's shipped directly to the customer. And then as a result, the merchant never sees or handles the product. This is coming off of Shopify.com. So this is something that I have known has existed for a long time. A lot of podcasters like to say, or I don't know, I wouldn't say a lot of podcasters. Let's just say I've seen podcasters say they like to use Teespring, or they like to use these other little websites that create t-shirts. And that's great. That's fine. But drop shipping with the systems that I'm going to share with you today, these make it easier for you to handle, and it makes it more customizable for what you want to create, and it's not a hassle. That's the most important thing. So when I talked earlier about what is value to our podcast listener, it can come in the form of education, entertainment, it can come in the form of motivational sayings, whatever it may be. We all will apply this to drop shipping. Okay, so let's first of all, let's talk about how drop shipping works. Okay, if you've never heard of drop shipping, this is how it works. Let me move my mouse over real quick. So this is what we do when it comes to drop shipping. Drop shipping starts typically with an item that you, as the podcast creator, want to sell. So you're going to go into a drop shipper supplier, and they're going to have a list of all these products that you have opportunity to sell. All right. And you're going to pick one. You're going to list it on your website, or maybe you're listing it on your Facebook shop or your Shopify page. All right. So you're listing that item that you want to sell. Then we come to the area where we are selling our product. We've put a price on it, and we provide that product for the customer through a sales channel like Shopify or Facebook. All right. So it's listed and it's available for sale. Then that customer says, oh, I want to buy that t-shirt. Let's go ahead and buy that. So basically, this is how it works. If Dave were to say, hey, Shannon, I like your Cobra Kai t-shirt. Where do I get one? I tell Dave, hey, Dave, it's $26. Give me $26 and I will go ahead and get that shirt for you. What Dave doesn't know is that he is paying retail. Well, he knows that he's paying retail. But what you're doing as the person who's creating this is you're purchasing the item at wholesale. You're purchasing it, say, at $13 instead of the $26. So where's that additional money that is on the back end? Well, that's going to be your profit. Okay. So here's how it works. You purchase the item from the wholesale drop shipper. Then the drop shipper sends that product directly to the customer themselves, and then you earn your profits. That's how easy it is. It seriously is so easy. I mean, I don't even want to say a caveman could do it because it's ridiculously easy. All right. So here's an example of a store that I created earlier this summer. And this is when I started implementing and learning a lot about supporter groups and whatnot. And I wanted to start implementing shops onto my Facebook page. And I'm going to use my mouse here, but I don't know if you can see it. But these are all items that I have created on my own. I've used a vector graphics programs. Now, before I jump into that, and I don't want to scare you about this, but these are actually pretty easy to make when you think about it. All right. So OGSCF stands for the original gangster Shan clan family. They made that name. They made it for themselves. So they have a little bit of ownership when it comes down to the products that I create. Here's one called Always on Offense. This is just based off of a philosophy that I have, a personal philosophy that you should always be on offense in fighting for what you believe in, because life can get really hard. So you always should be fighting and pushing towards and always on offense. And then here's one called it says Shanman 8 o'clock shuffle. And what I did for this particular design right here is that I just went inside of Instagram and I just started looking at ideas and combining ideas. I thought, well, let me make this type of t-shirt. And I started making these, and these things have sold. All right. Then I got on top of the Area 51 train where, everyone's going to Area 51. So I made hats and I made backpacks. In fact, I should have brought my backpack. I made an Area 51 backpack. It says survival pack, and it's an orange backpack. So I really capitalized on all of this. So what ended up happening over the course of the summer is that I started seeing people that were buying these products from me because they believed in who I was. These were exclusive products. And when I went to the concerts, they started purchasing them. And the OGSCF started coming into play. All right. And then I made a shirt called the Shanman Army. Now, I'm not the best graphic designer, I'll admit. Okay. But I created these in less than a week for myself. And now there's something that I can sell seasonally if I want to. And you see that a number of people started purchasing these things, OGSCF, and then there was lanyards that I've been giving away, buttons that I've created. So once I started learning how to do all these things, I started creating them. There's one, Shannon is my daddy. There's a big joke in my group about calling me Shan Daddy. And so then I made a shirt that said Shanman is my daddy. So you see that I'm taking things, I'm taking the content that they're creating for me already. All right. So this is something that is very, very huge. All right. So where exactly will you start when it comes down to this? All right. Where do you start? Well, you're going to want to start with getting, you want to start getting fonts. Okay. You want to start getting fonts. And I recommend that you go and you purchase fonts. I know that most of us podcasters, we are on a limited budget and it's difficult, but I will tell you this. Investing in the things that you want to create that will help move you along further down the line is the best investment that you'll ever make. All right. So when it comes down to starting to build out merchandise for yourself, let's talk about building out the first things before we even get a Shopify store set up. We want to start building the stuff out by listening to our audience. So I went to this website called Pixel Surplus. They are certainly not an affiliate code for me or an affiliate for me. They're just someone that I had found. And I thought, well, they got some really cool fonts. I'm going to start using these fonts. So pixelsurplus.com has all these fonts. You can see there's 99 premium products, they say, for $99. That's $1 a font. You can get 100 fonts for $1 a piece. And then you have those fonts in your library and you can use them wherever you want. If you wanted to use them on Canva, maybe you wanted to use them somewhere, I don't know where, but you can get these fonts and most of them are all give you the license for commercial reproduction. Okay. So, or commercial production. There's another one called Tom Chalky. He has a lot of cool fonts himself. There's one here that I like is Revive 80. That's got a total 80s vibe. I'm an 80s kid. So I went to Tom Chalky. Or if you want to just stay simple and go free, but you have to make sure that you can use these fonts for commercial use, just go to defont.com. Defont's got a lot of fonts that you can choose from. So those fonts being pixelsurplus.com, tomchalky.com, defont.com. And with Pixel Surplus and Tom Chalky, you can get daily free fonts. And then, or maybe you can get purchase the bundles. But I do know, like with Pixel Surplus, they'll give you a certain amount of fonts, and he'll just keep sending you fonts. Hey, get today's free font that is available in this bigger font. So if you get one free font, he might offer this one free font every now and again. All right. So just pay attention to what's going on. And these certainly aren't all of the websites that you can go to. There's other font websites that you can go to. All right. Now, I know when we're talking about graphic design, most of us are podcasters and we deal in audio. I get it. But I'm a big believer that if you are not developing yourself and building yourself to become something better over time, then you're not adding value onto yourself, which is not adding value into your community. Okay. So when it comes to basic graphic design, use a vector graphic design to create merchandise themselves or itself. All right. I recommend using Adobe Illustrator. There's a free software that's open source called Inkscape. I used it for many years. The only problem with Inkscape is that it is a little bit clunky because it is open source and free. It's like the Audacity, but of vector graphics. So it's free, but just kind of be aware of that. So I recommend that you're using Adobe Illustrator. Now, I've created a playlist, and I didn't make any of these tutorials, but I created a playlist that you can go to right there called shanman.tips/graphic design tutorials. And those are all tutorials that you can create or that you can learn from inside of Adobe Audition. These are the same tutorials that I used to create all of my graphics for my t-shirts themselves. Okay. So these tutorials, I just took time, I watched them, I practiced, and it took me, I will tell you this, I watched videos, I'd say maybe like a few an hour every day. And over the course of a month, I was like, oh, I can do this. And so once you learn how to do this, then you can really, really step up your game in terms of graphics and adding another opportunity or line of income for yourself. All right. So that's the first step that you need to take. The next step is you need to set up a Printful or Guten account. These are drop shippers particularly that you're going to be using, okay? These drop shippers allow you to go in and search their store, and you can see inside their store. I'm sorry, you can create a store inside of their platform and connect it directly to Shopify. Now, before we even think about getting a Shopify account, I need to make you aware of this, all right? Shopify accounts do cost money. And if you're going to get a certain plan, there's about $29. It's like $29 a month for a Shopify, I think, basic program or something like that. But you can get like the super ultra basic, which is the ability to sell on Facebook for only $9 a month. And I believe you can still connect Printful and Guten to the Shopify Facebook store. Okay. Now, Printful and Guten account setups are pretty easy. There's no physical inventory that you need to have. Long gone are the days of doing pre-orders. These are all on demand. But Printful and Guten have amazing products there for you. They have, they have Bella Canvas t-shirts up there. They have coffee mugs. They have workout clothes. They have jackets. They have pillows, mugs, stickers, bandanas, calendars, journals, anything you can think of. This is where I think you can continue to add value with your creativity if you're creating a podcast for people, all right, where you can promote a product out to them, all right? So think about these things. I'm telling you right now, this is not going to happen overnight, but start giving it some thought and start implementing and executing today on learning how these processes work. So we're first starting with figuring out our fonts and learning basic graphic design. Then we go to our Guten or our Printful accounts, and we look at what we have as far as products are concerned and see what the dimensions are, so you can learn what dimensions to upload inside of those platforms. Then what we need to do is we need to start our Shopify store and then start promoting, okay? So that's asset number 2. Asset number 3, I'm not going to spend too much time on, but I believe that every podcaster should be creating some form of a digital product by far, okay? You should be creating a digital product, info products and services that you can offer to get that reward, because you're doing all of this work for your podcast listeners. If they don't find value in that, that's not who you want involved. You want the people who see that your efforts are worth it. So you can create how-to guides, digital trainings, ebooks, custom graphic art design, consultations, maybe affiliate links. I personally have affiliate links on my website where people can purchase podcasting equipment. It's the equipment that I'm using right now. It just, to me, you're just constantly implementing. Just remember what I said, you're always building something, okay? So this comes back to social selling, all right? When it comes to social selling, we have to put our systems in place. Every system that we create for our podcast, it all comes back down to building a system. When it comes to editing, it all comes down to a system. You have to have a system in place in order to make things work. So where I'm telling the podcaster, work on your system for editing a podcast so you can spend more time developing and building out your brand so that you can become rewarded with monetization. So build systems in place and engage through listening through these social channels. Search through hashtags or competitor pages. If you didn't know, you can do this inside of Instagram. Go in and look for a hashtag. If you happen to sell toys, maybe you can go into the hashtag toys for sale and see all of these toys being sold for sale. I'm not saying that I'm a big toy guy, because there was a podcaster that reached out to me on email this weekend saying he sells toys and he wants to create a podcast, and he had this whole plan of how he wanted to sell his toys because they're custom made. And I said, go into Instagram, look at the toys for sale hashtag, see what ideas you can get, and maybe go in there and start communicating with some of those people that are in there and driving them to a Facebook group where you can all commune and talk about the stuff within the niche. You can see here, there's one for all kinds of vintage toys out here. You can see there's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. These are all things you can find. And once you have, let's go back to this one, toys for sale, you can click this follow button and these types of posts will start showing up in your Instagram feed. So just be aware of what's going on outside of your podcast, because these are going to be the opportunities that you open up for yourself. Now, we have systems in place. We're engaging by listening through hashtags and competitor pages. Follow those hashtags, like I mentioned, build relationships, and funnel people to your free Facebook group so that they can go to your Patreon. Okay, so let's look at how this, let's reiterate real quick before I have to run. Let's look at this real quick. We're building quality content that adds value, that builds trust, and that's going to be reciprocated right back if we continue to build that quality content, right? So when we look at this in, I guess, a more of a flowchart area, we have over here, create an inventory of items that you want to promote, the assets you want to promote inside of your podcast. That's that clock that I was talking about, okay? You put those into your podcast. So we're going to go from the podcast and we're going to go down first. We're not going to focus what's on the right. So we're going to put those things in our podcast that we want to promote. They can be static if you want, or you can rotate them out, all right? So you talk about those items in your podcast. Then you can promote those ideas inside of your free Facebook group that will lead them to the Patreon, okay? Now, when we talk about those items that we're talking about, you can also promote those products also on your Facebook group or from your podcast onto your Facebook group. And then when we get people in our Patreon, we can promote exclusive content or exclusive products or services, whatever it may be, where it has a higher value. So start thinking about the value that you can create and that you add to your podcast and your community, because that is where the money is. All right. So how does this all work in the end? And I'm going to tell you this right now. There are going to be people who say like, oh, that's a lot. Or there's going to be people who say like, oh, that's just, I don't, I don't feel like doing that. And then there's going to be people who say like, yeah, I can do this. This is all about mindset. And you have to learn to have patience and build all of these steps one step at a time. All right. And if something doesn't work, stop, take a step back and approach it from a new angle. Look at how someone else is doing it. Figure out how someone else has figured out the problem to that solution, or the solution to that problem. Approach from a different angle. Educate yourself, learn, read from the experts who have done it. Watch videos on YouTube, whatever you can, but pay attention, because there's no excuse that podcasters in today's day and age should not be earning some form of income with the platform and the collaboration efforts that we are utilizing right now in today's social media sphere, where we can earn, say, an extra 500, maybe an extra, an extra $1,000 a month if we can do that. I have some friends from the Crime and Sports podcast. They're crushing it with this model. So you have to think about those things. Take a step back. Don't worry and don't give up. A couple of resources I want to leave you with before I jump out of here on value themselves, because this is where I think it is all about. It's about the value that you're going to be giving to your your listener themselves. There's a book called The Go Giver. You can listen to it, whatever, if you've got a, your Amazon account, you can go download this. It's called The Go Giver by Bob Berg. And then there's another audiobook called on how to give value. It's called Utility by Jay Baer, Jaybaer. So I recommend that you go get The Go Giver and Utility. Utility I actually had to read because it's very visual, but both of these books talk about value. And what I recommend that when you get these books, you listen to them multiple times, over and over and over, and get the philosophy of how you see success, how you see your podcast success and the monetization, and how you can see that funneling back to you, because your efforts of what you create is all about the reward, is all the reward that you are going to get when it comes down to building out that content. If you guys have questions and you want to reach out to me, feel free to reach out to me at theshanman.com. I could talk about this for days. There are obviously things that I did not cover in this particular presentation, but there are some areas that I could go even further and deeper on that I might highlight in a YouTube video. Maybe I'll highlight it in a YouTube video. I don't know. But these are all areas, that I could talk on for days and days. So I want to thank Dave for allowing me to be here for International Podcast Day, and go out, make an impact with the world, brand yourself to be a change maker with your thoughts and your ideas, and make sure that when you do it, that you're being rewarded for it.
Shannon, man, you brought it, man. Full 60 minutes right there of all things podcasting. So much knowledge that people can take away, that they can implement. And you're right, man. I mean, we've known each other for a number of years, and it's incremental changes, and that's all it is. You're not expected to go out and do everything overnight. Just one small step, day by day. Make a calendar, make a workflow. One piece at a time, you'll eventually become a well-rounded podcaster with a great workflow, with so many different ideas and ways of capitalizing on your assets.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just want people to remember that you will get discouraged, but just remember that for every time you get discouraged, there's someone else that's equally discouraged, but they may take that effort to go a little bit further.
True. Well, Shannon, I can't thank you enough, man, for joining the International Podcast Day broadcast. Thanks for volunteering your time and your expertise. And everybody, continue the celebration using the hashtag International Podcast Day, because it is a celebration of the power of podcasts.